wake, on, ignition, on, park, engaging contactors now, contactors closed, hold the brake switch while I put it in drive, and hello and welcome back to the 900 horsepower electric Ford Escape project. If you're not caught up, here's a playlist. In this episode, differentials, axles, many new suspension parts, and a surprise. As you can see, I've pulled the front drive unit out again, and it was really easy. Oh no. Yeah, I lied, but it'll be much harder to get it back in. Anyway, I pulled this out because I bought something special for this. I need to split the gearbox in half again so I can install a Quaife limited slip differential. All Teslas, at least the ones that have differentials, have open differentials because that's all they need. If one wheel loses traction and starts to spin up, the car will just clamp down on the brake caliper on that wheel to rein it in. I don't know if you know this about early 2000s Ford Escapes, but they don't have computer-controlled brakes, so this won't be an option for me. A limited slip upgrade will obviously give me traction and stability benefits, but also I've heard that in these drive units, the spider gears are not particularly robust, and if you do a one-tire fire for too long, you could destroy the gearbox. I don't know if that's true, but I'd rather not find out, so LSD upgrade. There's also the safety aspect. I'm going to have 450 horsepower on the front axle. I could have one wheel lose traction, which means the other wheel would gain traction and potentially send me off into a tree, and I'd rather not have that happen. It's coming apart. Almost. What's the holdup? There we go. I said out with the open diff, as if this is easy. Come on. I don't know what's holding it in. I got the diff out after much gnashing of teeth, and now a new challenger has arrived. Getting the bearings off. I just want to acknowledge, this feels wrong. Ah! Now to, oh, it's an Eaton diff, look at that. Now to other side. Oh my God, how do I get a hold of that? There's no room here. How do I... Oh, it does just slip off. Awesome. And, ta-da! Now I can take this open differential core and throw it away. Now it's time for the LSD. Not that kind, this kind. Quaife. It was a very tight fit to take the ring gear off, and it will likewise be a very tight fit to put it back on. But I think I can get away with using the bolts to clamp it down into place and slowly cinch it down onto the differential hub. Yeah, this will work. All right, I looked it up, and the torque spec for these ring gear bolts is 75 pound-feet, which I can't hold on to the stupid ring gear. How is this possible? It isn't. Figured it out. And yes, those are welding gloves. Oh no! All right, I went back and reviewed the footage, and turns out the issue is that I just misremembered which bearing went on which end. No problem with the hardware. I'm just a panicky moron. Time for my least favorite part, putting the gearbox back together, which is my least favorite part because it involves silicone and panicking. It's almost there. This is going a lot more smoothly than last time. It's in! I almost forgot. But I didn't just get one Quaife diff, I have one for the rear drive unit too, so time to upgrade that one as well. This bundle of signal wires that runs through the middle of the gearbox here is the thing I hate the most about splitting the gearbox apart, because that's the only thing connecting these two halves other than just bearings and things that are easily disconnected. So it shall hang freely over here, and it'll have slack to pull through when I split the gearbox in half. Another thing I have to disconnect between the two halves that I don't think I've shown you yet is the 3-phase leads here, covered up by this high voltage warning sticker. Another thing I hate about splitting this gearbox, Tesla did not include any pry points on the casting, which is why you've seen me abusing a chisel to separate these two halves. Judging by the slightly higher amount of black metal dusty residue in the side of this gearbox, I think this drive unit is slightly higher mileage than the other drive unit. It doesn't make any difference, it's just an observation. I got it! And just like that, I have another open differential core I don't know what to do with. Now to put all that stuff on the new Quaife limited slip differential. I feel like there's something wrong with this one. It's just spinning. Oh. Alright, let's get that one broken bolt out there before the thread locker hardens. Time to bust out the left-handed drill bit. I bought these years ago, and this is the first time I'm using them. I have retrieved a replacement bolt, complete with a dab of hot sauce for flavor. Hang on, I just noticed the new bolt I put in is longer than all the rest of them. Okay, now it's time to watch me totally block the camera to put this diff into place. It's in. I got it in, and it only took a lot of effort. A little bit of swearing. As you might be able to see, I've already laid out a beautiful silicone bead. I'm lying, it's ugly, now it's time to marry the two halves back together, which is a process I enjoy very much. Oh, yes, 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 okay. It's back in, but there's one thing left to do, and it's surely the most important part. How often does this happen to you? You just come back from a long drive in your pedal-assisted electric car thing, and you are hungry. But you're also exhausted. You don't want to cook food, and you don't want to go out because of all the sweat, and you don't want to pull a meal out of your freezer because they taste like cardboard from the garbage can. No, I'm the only one? Well, you're the weird one, not me. Factor meals are delivered straight to your door in an insulated, chilled box. All you have to do is pick your meal, in my case, mushroom chicken thighs and wild rice, remove the cardboard sleeve, vent the film, and pop it in your off-grid solar-powered microwave for 2 minutes. 2 minutes later, you've got a hot meal ready to eat. But the best part is Factor meals are never frozen and they never disappoint. I usually go for the Chef's Choice meals, but you also have Calorie Smart, Keto, and Vegan options as well. In addition to their meals, they also have other options like these smoothies. Thanks to Factor for sponsoring this video. If you want to try Factor for yourself, go to Factor75.com and use code AGINGWHEELS50 at checkout for 50% off your first box. Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring this video, and no, I'm not going to acknowledge what I'm sitting in. You're just going to have to wonder. This is a lot of axles. That's not what I said. These are the 4 half shafts and the 4 wheel hubs made completely custom for my application by the Drive Shaft Shop. These inner stubs that fit into the drive unit are the Drive Shaft Shop's own in-house design. These are beefy things. And the reason they made me 4 custom wheel hubs is because the escape spline pattern on the hubs was very slightly different front and rear. It was a slightly oddball spline pattern, so it was easier for them to just make their own hubs that fit in there, and I can just swap these in with their own splines. Now, I really hope I did all the measurements right, because from order to delivery was about half a year, so if I have to resize anything, I'm going to be waiting quite a while. I'm trying to loosen it, but I'm just creating a huge mess. Good thing I also got new wheel bearings on all 4 corners, because that is not good. My ears are ringing. Wow, it is not moving. I'm afraid of this now. Yeah, it's not gonna work. This wheel bearing is quite shot. The wheel bearing in the other knuckle was so firmly lodged in place I couldn't get it out even with a hydraulic press. In this one, I haven't even tried yet, but the snap ring that retains it in place is so rusted in place that it claimed the teeth of my snap ring pliers. So instead of even attempting this, I'm just going to order 2 brand new wheel knuckle assemblies. Holy crap! Oh, that's pulling on the brake. How does this come off? Brake drums are stupid. I managed to get the brake hardware off, but I'm not proud of my methods. I went ballistic at it and ripped them off in a fit of rage. I have a firm belief that brake drums were designed by Satan himself. Okay, and trying to figure out how to take this hub out without removing the trailing arm from the escape body, this is what I've come up with. There's a huge bolt running through the middle here. There's a nut on the back of it that's the size of the hub. And then I've got this piece of flat bar here with the hole that I cut with a hole saw that is now completely destroyed. And some standoffs, and hopefully as I tighten on this bolt, it will pull the hub through. I might have to reinforce this flat bar because it's just flat bar, but we're going to try it first. Oh, it's bending. Oh, yeah. I sent this off to the welder, and by that I mean me in a different hat, and we'll see if it holds now. Ha-ha! It worked! Looky! I'm surprised that worked so well. Ah! Jesus! I had to extract the wheel bearing. Oh. Oh, that was horrible. Now to squish the new bearing into place. Now the new custom hub, the first one of these custom parts that I'm actually able to put on here. Oh, I need to put the studs in first. Oh my God, am I getting it? Why am I so prematurely excited? I got it! There was a spark that flew off of there. There's a lot of potential energy in that. Wow, that was a lot easier. I don't know why it's so extra dirty in here, if this wheel cylinder leaked or what, but there's a lot. I can't. I just can't. Harbor Freight to the rescue. Hi, Raz. Oh my God, I can't get it in there. You complete idiot. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the small snap ring pliers. I've just bent these pins in a little bit. I don't think this is gonna work, but if it does, I'm gonna be very upset. I just wasted 30 bucks on the big tool, and I didn't need it. I didn't need it! This has had enough. As it turns out, before I can convert this thing to an EV, first I have to convert it to a train wreck. It looks really awful right now, but I'm waiting on lower control arms for the front, both sides, steering knuckles for the front, obviously, both sides, wheel cylinders for the brakes in the rear, both sides, rear lower control arms, both sides, and brake lines, because I kind of destroyed them. Also a bump stop for that side because it's kind of rusted and fell off. And the only new parts I have installed right now are the wheel hubs and wheel bearings in the back. I've just come back from San Francisco where I was at Open Sauce. It was fantastic, and while I was gone, my suspension parts arrived. For the front, we have 2 new steering knuckles. I managed to find these without bearings and hubs pre-installed. And I have 2 new front lower control arms. Truthfully, I didn't need new ball joints here. These have 0 play in them, but the seal is completely shot, so their lifespan is limited. So I got new control arms. Good thing I'm replacing these. You see that bushing? It's cracking. I also got new tie rod ends, which I forgot about until just now. I left the old locking nut on here just so I could use it as a depth gauge. It's storming. You might be able to hear it. Anyway, I forgot to order snap rings to hold these wheel bearings in place, so I've ordered those, and while I wait for those to arrive, I'm going to go ahead and press these wheel bearings in place and then move on to the rear suspension. Lower rear control arms. I got these for the same reason I got the front. I really only needed ball joints, but the whole control arm assembly was much easier to put in the car, and it wasn't much more expensive, so I got the whole thing. It is raining extremely hard right now. Oh. Time for the cheater bar. Oh no, that's the worst scenario. This is a problem. That is the bolt head that I just broke off. And on the other side of this is the rest of the bolt going through a captive nut. I don't know how I'm going to get that bolt out of there. My first thought was to weld a nut on the end of the bolt that's sticking out and then unscrew it from the other side. But I can't do that because it's a partially threaded bolt. There are not threads all the way down the bolt. I would unscrew it a little bit and then it would jam up. Then I thought I can weld a nut onto that end of the bolt that's sticking out and screw it in just far enough for the other side of the bolt to stick out from the other side. Then I can weld a nut onto that, grind the nut off from the other side, and then unscrew it. But that's a lot. Unfortunately, it's the only idea I have that doesn't involve destroying that captive nut, so I think I'm going to try it. All right, first to weld on the nut onto here. Now I can take my breaker bar and attempt to screw this in. I hope it doesn't break straight off. It's actually spinning free. No, it broke straight off. Okay. Right, my one and only non-destructive idea didn't work at all. So I'm not going to do anything the rest of the day. That was awful. Moving on swiftly from that mildly traumatic experience, all of my front suspension parts have arrived, so let's go back to that. I've done one thing today and I've already hit a stumbling block. The drive shaft shop accidentally sent the wrong size studs for these hubs. 4 of them are the right size, but the remaining 6 are too big. I went to put in number 5 here and it bounced out because they're the wrong size spline. So let's see if I can find some locally. Got them. All right, someone messed up. These 2 hubs, which are otherwise identical, have 2 different size stud holes. This one's 12 millimeter, this one's 14 millimeter, which explains why I had 2 different sizes of stud in the package. However, the problem is they only sit 4 of the 12 millimeter studs and 6 of the big ones. So I did have to go out and buy these, but as it turns out, I only needed to buy 1. And I found this out when I put the new studs in there. Just free floats. If I'm perfectly honest, these studs don't fit quite right. I think they've sent the wrong studs and the fit's a little bit more interference than it should be because they don't sit in there flush. But they're not going to go anywhere. They'll hold on the wheel. I'm fine with it. Have you noticed what these custom CV shafts are missing yet? The Escape has ABS. I'd like to preserve the functioning of that ABS, and these CV shafts do not have ABS tone rings. That's this thing right here with the notches on it that swipes past a Hall effect sensor so the vehicle can tell how fast each wheel is spinning. This goes on the end of the CV shaft like here, but obviously it doesn't fit, which means I need to machine a spacer. I don't have a lathe, so it's time for the Stepcraft CNC router and a chunk of aluminum. Who needs a lathe? In theory, a CNC router is less precise, but I got these to a perfect press fit after only 2 tries, and this is more repeatable than a lathe. Fitting the tone ring on the spacer is an easy task, but putting the spacer on the CV shaft is a little bit less delicate. The Hall effect sensor sits right here in the steering knuckle, and since I made that spacer, I can put the tone ring right below that Hall effect sensor, and the ABS can function properly. I will have anti-lock brakes. Spacer, wheel knuckle, put in the brand new bolt, put the wheel speed sensor back into place, do the track rod bolt up by hand because, I don't know, I don't trust myself. It's so weird this being connected to something finally. Well, you can kind of see it. Here's the angle of the CV shaft. It has a little bit of a backward angle and a little bit of downward angle, although the downward angle is going to disappear once the suspension is loaded up. Considering the space I had to work with, I don't think that angle is too bad. Can't forget the basic brake job task of lubricating these sliding pins. New brake pads. I don't know the purpose of this spring, but at least it's hard to install. Oh, ow! There we go. New brake disc that I got ages ago. Okay, now we put the brake caliper in place. I decided to tackle the brake disc first on this side. By the way, this silicone lube that I'm putting on these pins is the same lubricant I use to lubricate the axes of my CNC router. And of course we can't forget the nightmare spring. I'm going to turn off the camera for this. Not because I'm going to be cursing or anything, but because the camera's in my... There we go. In with the other CV shaft. Wheel knuckle. 1 bolt, 2 bolt, 3 bolt. I can count. Back driving the motor through the wheel hub. New disc, freshly cleaned with Brooklyn. Old caliper, but with new pads. And lastly, the wheel speed sensor. I'm not looking forward to working on the rear suspension again. There's lots of springs, big and small, that can cause equal amounts of pain and frustration. And there's things that didn't want to move. I've already broken something, and I've barely even started back here. I broke the wheel speed sensor in this wheel, and I was just looking at it. Obviously, I didn't break it with my eyes, but I was just like looking. Never mind. You don't need an explanation. Put in this new control arm, or at least attempt to, because, you know, oh no, it just slots right in. I do, however, have to replace the captive nut with a regular nut, because, you know, the captive nut is in 4 pieces, and I knocked it off with an air hammer. I can't effectively get a spring compressor around this coil spring here, so I'm going to try to lower the lift down onto this stand to raise this arm up so that I can connect these 2 holes here, which are, at the moment, quite far apart. I had to buy new shock bolts because I destroyed the other ones, and these were insanely expensive. I think it was $60 for 2 of these. There we go. I got a new wheel cylinder and a hard brake line that spans this gap here, so I need to remove both of the old ones. I'm rather upset at the moment. Did you catch what I forgot? The CV shaft. And it can only be put in place when both control arms and this shock mount are disconnected. And this is free to swing this way. It's the only way I can get the CV shaft in there, which means I have to undo all of that. As my dad always said, any job worth doing is worth doing twice. That wasn't so bad. There we go. Okay, let's pull this way off to the, oh my God, problem. Big problem. It appears as though fitting the CV shaft into place is physically impossible. I thought that with all of the stuff detached from this arm, I could pull it away enough to stick the CV shaft in here, but it doesn't pull away enough at all. This is as far away as it goes, and I can't push it further down either because it hits the limit of travel for the CV shaft. So I didn't know what to do at this point, so I experimented with putting in the CV shaft outer joint first, and in doing so I realized if I push up on the trailing arm, it pushes it out further, which resulted in, oh, I got it! I got it! Crisis averted. It's not, you know, in, but it's like sitting in there, which is closer than I was before. Okay, now I think I got everything in there. All right, brake drum hardware is incredibly confusing if you don't have an example to follow. Just like with every other part of the suspension, installing the new brake hardware involved struggling. Oh, doing it wrong the first time. Oh no, I forgot a piece. And then more struggling. I can't get it. You know, maybe this is all a joke. Maybe they thought, haha, we'll put a spring in there that's too small, but he'll never know. Okay, big problem, but this time it's not my fault. See this little spur gear here? This is the auto adjust mechanism for the brake shoes. I went to manually adjust these things because these shoes were just a little bit too far out, and it wouldn't move. It was completely jammed, and I finally figured out why. These are the brake shoes I kept around so I could see how everything goes back together. Yes, they're gross, but see this spring here? How it comes up and out of the way and over and then down? And here's a bit of the new brake assembly. See how the spring doesn't come up and out of the way? It's jamming against this spur gear and jamming it in place. Which means I have to take all of this off again, hateful springs and everything, so that I can remove this new spring that fouls and doesn't work and replace it with one of the old springs from the old brake shoe assembly. Just to reiterate, wrong, right. Wrong, right. Power stop, bad. Also, 100% asbestos free. Don't put a legal requirement as a marketing boast. Get it back together. And with the correct spring in there, it was significantly easier to install. Which makes me more angry that I was fighting a wrong part this whole time. On this side, I have one extra thing to do, because on the right side, bump stop. On this side, no bump stop. it's rusted off. These rear bump stops are one of the rare parts on the Escape that are not readily available. They're not on Rock Auto, they're not on eBay, except for one singular listing for these rear bump stops, and they were charging $132 for them. I was feeling cheap. Realistically, I should have just paid the $132 for them, but I was feeling cheap, so I didn't, so I'm just going to fix this one instead. Is it pretty? No, but it's a bump stop. Here comes the fun thing. I just made a terrible discovery, and I just happened to catch this by accident. The snap ring that holds this wheel bearing in place, makes sure it doesn't slip out of the hub, I forgot to put it in. You might think, no big deal, put the snap ring on there. But the problem with that is the opening part of the snap ring has to go over the hub, which is far wider than the snap ring is capable of opening without breaking. You might think, well, just pull the hub out, no big deal. Put the snap ring on, put the hub back in place. But not only would that be a metric ton of work that I would like to avoid at all costs, it's also kind of not an option, because when you pull the hub out of the wheel bearing, one half of the inner race of the wheel bearing stays with the hub. And while these two pieces are theoretically separable, I have absolutely zero idea how you would do this. And I can't just buy a new hub because these are custom parts. So I got to figure something out that involves leaving this hub in place, leaving everything as it is, and then somehow putting a snap ring in there, because running without a snap ring, while it would probably be fine, that's not good enough. So here's what I'm going to try. This opening is too small to fit over the hub. I need to widen it, and to widen it, I'm just going to cut off one of these legs. But I can't cut off too much of it, because then my snap ring pliers won't be able to grab onto anything. So this is the maximum opening that I can do with these snap ring pliers. Now I need to drill a hole right here to give the snap ring pliers a place to grab onto, but I can't do that because this is hardened spring steel. So first I need to temper it. Flames are so last century, so I'm going to use my induction heater. That was surprisingly fast. It's already at a cherry red. Hey, I got it! Awesome. Now for the truly difficult part, these snap ring pliers barely fit in here. There's very limited access. Haha! I did it! It would have been better if I would have remembered to put the snap ring in there in the first place, but whatever, I made it work, and I didn't have to dismantle everything and ruin my entire week. So yay, done! I did the rest of the brake stuff off camera because you've already seen it. Although I'm not really done yet. I have to bleed the brakes, I have to add gearbox oil to the front and rear drive unit before I forget. There's various nuts like this one right here that I still need to tighten on the suspension. But first, now these CV axles have fit incredibly well, and I'm incredibly surprised, but there is one rub point on both rear wheel. The band right here that cinches the outer CV boot to the outer CV joint, when it hits the pinch point, it fouls on the upper control arm. So I need to take both upper control arms off and notch that little spot for clearance. All right, time for my least favorite, noisiest tool. That was awful. And now, no clearance issues. You know what I should do now that there's something connecting the wheels to the drive units? Here's my bench test setup that I built up off camera. We've got contactors, negative and positive, and pre-charge resistor down there. There's the AEM PDU, just as one of them that I have to control the outputs that controls all three of those contactors. And there's also a switch 12-volt supply on here that will do much more in the future, like cooling pumps and other stuff. But right now I only need one. I've got the 8-button keypad, also from AEM. This is the drive direction controls and a contactor activation switch. Wake input, ignition input, these will be the keys in the Escape, 2 positions on the key in the Escape, 2 brake switches temporarily wired up. Prius throttle pedal, this has 2 outputs. Here's the AEM VCU 300 that controls everything, sitting on top of 6 of the Chrysler Pacifica battery modules wired in series, 370 volts nominal, something like that. I think it's at 380 volts right now, and a PC connection. And we have motion! That's all I'm going to do at the moment. There's no coolant running through the inverter. There's no gearbox oil in there. I risk damage if I do anything more than just that little simple thing. In fact, I'm going to put it back into park, which is no different than neutral at the moment. we have motion. Now you'll notice that that is spinning in reverse. That's because this front drive unit is mounted in reverse and I haven't reconfigured it to drive the other way yet. And that's it for now. This portion took me a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. I've been working on this off and on. I haven't been working on it continuously, but I've been working on it for 2 months. I started with the LSD swap in the front drive unit the tail end of May, I think it is, and it's August now. That's more than 2 months now that I say that out loud, but again, it's not continuous work. Now, I don't know what the next installment of this project is going to be, whether it's going to be putting some of the wiring components in the car and start to integrate all of that mess. Let's be honest, it's going to be the cooling system, or if it's going to be the big one that I have left to do, which is finish the battery pack. I'm looking at the part of the battery pack that I have finished right there off camera, and I haven't even finished that one component yet, so it's going to be the biggest thing. Now, the deadline that I mentioned at the beginning of this project has vanished. I now have a new deadline, and that is July of next year. So that's pretty great, but I got to be careful with that because there's a fine line between taking my time and procrastinating. That said, I'm probably not going to touch this for a month or two while I work on other things because it sort of looms when I'm in the middle of one of these projects, but then I walk past it for weeks on end and every day, and then it starts to nag at me, and then I have to work on it again. That's been my process so far. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for your continued support. I'll see you next time.